There's a kind of pain no one can see, not because it doesn't exist, but because it happens in silence. While you're washing dishes, while you're driving down a familiar road, while an old song drifts out of a coffee shop speaker, and suddenly, your chest tightens like something is squeezing you from the inside. You still love them, but they're already gone. And the strangest part isn't the pain, it's that you know you should let go. If you want to let go, you've told yourself 100 times that you need to let go. But every morning when you wake up, there's still the first person in your head. This isn't a story about weakness. This is a story about how the human brain is wired and how you can rewrite that wiring without having to shut down your own emotions. The Stoics didn't tell you not to love. They told you to understand clearly what you're holding on to and why you can't seem to open your hand. This is Victory Stoic. And today, we're going to walk through 6 things no one ever told you about detaching emotionally from someone you still love. Number 1. Real love or attachment. Do you know which one you're actually holding on to? Daniel texted his ex at 2 inches the morning. Not because anything was urgent, not because he had something important to say. He was just lying in the dark, staring at an empty ceiling, and the silence in that room had suddenly become too heavy to carry alone. He typed, "You doing okay?" 3 words. Sent. Then he lay there staring at the screen, heart beating faster than it should, waiting for those little dots to appear, the ones that meant she was typing back. She didn't reply. He lay there until 4 a.m. The next morning, he told his best friend he still loved her, that he couldn't sleep because he missed her so much. His friend listened, then asked a question Daniel couldn't answer for weeks afterward. Did you text her because you missed her, or because you couldn't stand the silence in that room? This is the question most of us never dare to ask ourselves honestly, because the line between love and attachment is razor thin, and from the outside, they look identical. Both come with longing, both come with pain, both come with sleepless nights and mornings where the first person in your head is still them. But look a little closer and you'll see the difference. Real love asks, is this person doing well? Attachment asks, is this person thinking about me? Real love wants the other person to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include you. Attachment wants them to stay, not because you love them, but because when they stay, you don't have to face the emptiness inside yourself. Psychologist Carl Jung called that emptiness the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've never had the courage to look at directly. The loneliness, the self-doubt, the fear that without someone loving us, we're no longer worth very much. Jung observed that people tend to project those gaps onto the person they love, making that person responsible for filling what they've never built within themselves. When that person leaves, you don't just lose them, you lose the thing that was covering the gap. Epictetus said, "It's not things that disturb us, it's our judgments about things." Daniel didn't arrive at this understanding in a sudden flash of insight. It came on an ordinary morning, sitting alone with his coffee, when he realized he didn't miss Sarah because he loved her. He missed her because when she was around, he didn't have to sit with himself like this. That was the moment everything began to shift. Letting go doesn't start with stopping love. It starts with pausing long enough to ask honestly, what am I holding on to, love, or the fear of being left alone with myself? Number 2, why your brain won't let go, and why that's not your fault. Here's something no one taught you in school. Breaking up with someone you love and withdrawing from drugs activate the same region of the brain. That sounds extreme, but it's science. In 2010, researchers at Rutgers University scanned the brains of people who had recently gone through a breakup and were still in the thick of intense longing. The result, the brain region that lit up when they viewed photos of their ex, was the nucleus accumbens, the area that governs craving and addictive behavior. The same region that lights up in cocaine users when they see the drug. Love isn't just an emotion, it's chemistry. When you love someone, your brain releases dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin, a cocktail that creates feelings of safety, happiness, and connection. When that person disappears, your brain doesn't understand why the supply was suddenly cut off. It responds exactly the way a body responds to withdrawal. Restlessness, insomnia, inability to focus. A constant circling back, searching for something to fill the void. That's why you pick up your phone and scroll through old photos at 1 a.m., not because you're weak, but because your brain is doing exactly what it was wired to do, find its way back to the dopamine it lost. Kevin learned this the hardest way possible. He and Emma broke up after 4 years together. The first week, he was fine, kept busy packing things up, seeing friends, telling himself it would get better. The second week, he started checking her Instagram. 3 times a day, then 10 times. Then he stopped counting. Every time she posted something new, his heart would spike, his hands would go slightly unsteady, and he'd sit staring at the screen with a feeling that was a strange mix of pain and relief. Relief that at least he could still see her, that she still existed somewhere in his world, even if only through a screen. That's the addiction loop. Seneca wrote, "Withdraw into yourself as much as possible, associate with those who will make you better." Understanding the mechanism doesn't make the pain disappear, but it does something more important. It takes away the shame. You're not weak, your brain is just doing its job. And once you know what you're actually fighting, you can start fighting it the right way. Number 3, dismantling the shrine, seeing the truth without a filter. The human memory after a breakup is a remarkably gifted liar. It doesn't erase the bad memories, it just buries them at the bottom, then arranges all the beautiful moments on top, drapes a warm golden light over everything, and plays it back for you every night like a highlight reel, directed by your own longing. You remember the first time he held your hand on a night train. You remember the scent of her perfume in the morning. You remember the way they looked at you like you were the most important person in that room. You don't remember the times you were left standing alone in the middle of an argument. You don't remember feeling completely alone, even when you were right next to them. You don't remember all the small compromises you swallowed down day after day until you couldn't quite recall what you'd ever wanted for yourself. Ryan and Jessica dated for 2 years in Boston. After the breakup, Ryan remembered Jessica the way you remember a great film, beautiful visuals, moving score, an ending that didn't go the way you wanted. He told his friends she was perfect, and that he would never find anyone like her again. His friend, the one who had spent 2 years listening to Ryan complain about how Jessica always canceled plans at the pain last minute, how she never apologized directly, how Ryan always felt like he was the one trying harder, looked at him and said, "Ryan, who exactly are you remembering?" Psychologists call this idealization after loss. Research from Northwestern University found that the brain tends to reconstruct memories of ended relationships in a more positive light than reality warranted, especially during periods of grief as a protective mechanism against confronting a more complicated truth, that the relationship may never have been as perfect as we believed. Epictetus said, "Don't seek for everything to happen as you wish it would. Seek for the truth." The practical work here isn't about sitting down and listing your ex's flaws so you can talk yourself into disliking them. That's not the point. The point is allowing yourself to see the whole picture, the beautiful evenings and the cold mornings. When you see the full truth, the other person returns to their actual size, an ordinary human being, not a legend. And you'll realize you're not missing them. You're missing a version of them that never quite existed. Number 4. Stop torturing yourself with your imagination. There's a particular kind of suffering you inflict on yourself, and it leaves no visible marks. It happens around 11 p.m., when you're lying on your back staring at the ceiling, and you start building scenarios that haven't happened yet. Your ex is somewhere with someone new, laughing, happy, not thinking about you, or worse, thinking about you, and feeling nothing. You imagine their future wedding. You imagine yourself 10 years from now, still alone. You construct things that have no shape yet, and you ache from them as though they were real. Michael knew that feeling. 3 months after she left, he wasn't hurting from what had actually happened anymore. He was hurting from what he built inside his own head every night. He pictured her out with new friends in Manhattan. He saw, in his mind, the way she laughed with someone else, the same laugh she used to give him. He had no evidence for any of it, but his brain didn't need evidence. His brain only needed darkness and enough idle time to construct its own private hell. He was losing sleep over things that had never happened. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." He wrote that more than 2,000 years ago, and it describes exactly what was happening in Michael's apartment at 2 inches the morning. Research from Harvard on mind wandering, the state where the mind drifts without a fixed task, found that when the brain isn't given a specific anchor in the present moment, it automatically drifts toward the past or leaps into the future. And in that state, it tends to amplify negative scenarios, an evolutionary mechanism meant to anticipate danger. But in the modern world, it becomes a tool for self-inflicted suffering. The solution isn't forcing yourself to think positively. That's the wrong answer to the right question. The solution is pulling your mind back to exactly one point right now. Not tomorrow, not 6 months from now, not the imagined wedding you were never invited to. Just today. Just the meal in front of you. Just the breath you're breathing. The only question you need to answer isn't, what will my life look like in 10 years? It's, what do I need to do in the next hour to feel even slightly better? 1 hour. That's all. Number 5. Creating distance, not running away. But discipline. James deleted his ex's number on a Wednesday afternoon. No dramatic soundtrack, no tears. He was just sitting in his car after work, looking at her name and his contacts, and pressed delete before he could change his mind. Then he sat quietly for a moment, staring out through the windshield, feeling his hands tremble slightly. It was the first thing he had done for himself in 4 months. A lot of people think cutting off contact is an act of hostility, that you have to hate someone to not want to see them anymore. But that's the wrong read. James didn't hate her. He still loved her, and that was precisely why he needed to stop. When you still love someone, every time you check their social media isn't a harmless act. It's a small dose of the very thing you're trying to quit. Enough to keep you locked in the loop, not enough to satisfy, not enough to release. Just enough to keep the wound from closing. Researchers at the University of Missouri tracked the behavior of recently separated people on social media and found that those who continued following their ex online showed higher levels, tension of distress, slower emotional recovery, and greater difficulty forming new connections compared to those who actively created digital distance. Not because they were weaker, but because they were continuously re-triggering a loop that the brain needed to be allowed to close. Epictetus said, "If you want to make progress, be willing to be thought foolish and unreasonable in some things." Deleting their number, unfollowing them online, clearing away the things that pull you back without serving you. These actions look small, and sometimes people on the outside won't understand them, but this isn't for them. This is about giving your own brain the conditions it needs to begin a new cycle. Discipline in love isn't coldness, it's respect. Enough respect for yourself to stop torturing yourself with things you cannot change. Number 6, learning to be alone, not as punishment, but as refuge. There's something more frightening than losing the person you love. It's sitting alone in silence and realizing you don't know what to do with yourself. Not everyone admits this, but many people cling to a relationship not because they love the person, but because that person fills the silence. When someone texts you every morning, when someone's there waiting to hear about your long day, when someone is lying beside you at 11 p.m., you never have to face the hardest question. Without anyone here, who are you? David was living alone in Seattle after the breakup. In the early weeks, he never turned the TV off. Not because he was watching anything, but because he needed the sound of human voices in the room. He ate dinner with a podcast running loud. He slept with the lights on. He did everything he could to avoid sitting in silence and feeling the vast weight of the loneliness surrounding him. Then, one evening, his phone died and he didn't bother to plug it in. He sat on the windowsill and looked out at the street, did nothing, thought nothing in particular, and for the first time in months, he could actually breathe. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward becoming whole from the inside. Not by finding someone to fill what's missing, but by going inward, facing the neglected parts of yourself, and rebuilding from there. A person who is complete within themselves doesn't need someone else in order to feel like enough. And when they love from abundance, not from lack. Research from the University of Virginia found that people with a genuine capacity to enjoy time alone, not merely endure it, but actually enjoy, it showed lower anxiety levels, healthier decision-making in relationships, and a significantly lower tendency to stay in situations that weren't good for them simply out of fear of being alone. Seneca wrote, "Withdraw into yourself, but first, prepare to welcome what is best." Solitude is not something to get through. It's somewhere to learn to stay. Not forever, but long enough to know that you don't need anyone else to feel whole. And once you know that no one can control you with their absence anymore, detaching emotionally from someone you still love is not an act of coldness. It is an act of maturity. It means you were brave enough to look at the truth clearly, that holding on isn't the same as loving, that missing someone isn't proof that you need them, that loneliness is not the worst thing that can happen to you. The worst thing is living your whole life clinging to someone because you didn't have the courage to stay with yourself. The Stoics never promised you the pain would disappear. They only said that you get to choose how you carry it. If you're in that place right now, leave a comment that says, "I am enough" down below. No explanation needed. Just put it there as a reminder to yourself. This is Victory Stoic. We'll see you in the next one.